Welcome back. Yes, apologies for last week. However, this should now continue on without any more interruptions. So basically we're looking at around about 3 more sessions. So this one, and then over the next couple of sessions I'm going to be looking a little bit at values and goals. And then the last one being committed actions, which, acceptance, commitment therapy, you'd assume there'd be something there about committed actions. So that's probably where we will kind of leave it as an end. We'll look at that kind of committed actions, wrap up type stuff. So today's session, what I am referring to as self-esteem, or me, myself, and I can't believe I did that. And that's primarily, anxiety is one of those things, isn't it? It's one of those things that will highlight to us the mistakes, will highlight to us all of the things that were a mistake in the past and how they're going to affect us in the future, and very much also looking at how we're going to have to deal with stuff in the future because of who I am, the decisions I've made, and everything else. So that whole concept of I can't believe I did that. So to start off, my intention on this one is it's probably going to be a slightly shorter kind of stream. However, has been made abundantly clear by pretty much anything that I do. When I think something's going to be short, we'll still be here in like 50 minutes or something. So, the objective here is slightly shorter, just kind of, but we'll see. I don't commit to shortening these things. So I suppose initially what I want to do is just, as I'm going to try and do every session from this point, is just kind of summarize some key points. Because one of the things that we know about any new skill or any new practice that I'm involving myself in, the more we do something, the easier it is for it to come to my mind. So there's a couple of concepts that I'll often talk to people about is, you have the conversation before you need the conversation. So if I need to practice a specific skill, if I'm practicing my kicking for footy, I don't wait until the game to practice my kicking for footy. I practice that and I get it so that it's a natural thing that my body automatically does it with no pressure and no stress. Because then when I find myself in a position where there is pressure and there is stress, my body kind of already knows how to do it. And so, you will have heard, repetition is the key and a lot of these kind of statements, and they are all accurate. That's, one of the joys of things that become part of the social zeitgeist, the social understanding, is a lot of the time they actually make sense. It's a little bit like when I had a chat earlier about the idea of mindfulness. How mindfulness is really important. It's so in our kind of social awareness nowadays that it sometimes feels like it's just a buzzword. And likewise, a lot of things that kind of we look at around mental health, it almost feels like, but it's just a buzzword nowadays. But similarly to kind of reiterating points and just re-going over stuff, the more something is in our environment, the more we're aware of it, the easier it becomes for us to identify it, to be able to practice it. So, longest introduction ever to just summarizing some key points. I told you, it'll be short, it'll never be short. So I suppose a couple of the things that I wanted to highlight, especially heading into today's kind of stream, the key points that I wanted to look at is the idea, we talked quite a bit when we were looking at the grounding a couple of weeks back, and the general view of kind of the thoughts and emotion stuff is the overriding system that we want to have in place for ourselves around ACT is being present. And so this is that key part, right? I even said in terms of I can't believe I did that. It's about looking back at stuff I've done and how that's going to impact. It's looking forward and what's going to happen. ACT is very much about being present. It's about being in the current situation. It's about focusing on the here and now. It's about engaging with meaningful activity. And that ties into, we talked a little bit about the thinking self versus the observing self. So the thinking self being in the middle of it, having the the stream of consciousness constantly running, versus the observing self, being outside of that, standing beside it, being able to see what's happening, and just noticing that it's happening without having to be completely invested in it. And we looked at the idea and kind of explored that, or managing that, around fusion and diffusion. So fusion being where there's the absolute truth, where it's got to be close to me and I've got to totally be in it, versus diffusion, where I want to be able to hold it. It's not about putting it away, it's holding it, but it's holding it lightly. And it's just walking beside it, it's having it there, it's having it present, but not having it being the be-all and end-all of what I want to do, or my perception, or my experience, or my meaning. One of the other key parts that's going to very strongly come in today is going to be the idea of no good or bad, or right or wrong. And instead, thinking about things from the perspective of helpful and comfortable and functional. Do these things do what I need them to do? Are they helpful for me? Do they create a sense of comfort in me? Not are they good or bad. Not is it the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do or the right way to think or the wrong way to think. Is what's happening helpful? And what I am doing, is that helpful? Is it comfortable? That is a key component that I always come back to. When I'm working with clients, I always come back to it. In this, I'm going to keep coming back to it because it is really important when we start talking about self-esteem. So right off the bat, let's look at this idea of self-esteem. So esteem, as a very basic kind of definition, is a respect and an admiration. If I hold somebody in esteem, then I consider them to be somebody that I want to be, that I emulate. If I am my esteemed colleague, usually means my respected colleague, the person who is well known in this field that people look up to. So as its very definition then, in that kind of social construct, is the idea that self-esteem is then thinking about myself in a positive way, in a respectful way, having admiration for the things that I do and the people that I am. Person I am? Let's hope it's not people I am. That might get complicated. The person that I am. The issue, and some of you are probably already kind of going, oh, okay. The issue that we have there is, right, self-esteem, thinking about myself positively. We've talked a bit about ACT. It's not about positive. It's about meaning, having meaning attached to something. And I suppose, arguably, having meaning is positive and not being helpful or comfortable or functional is kind of negative. Okay, no, you know what? I'm going to play with the positive, negative side of stuff. But a lot of the time when we think about self-esteem, we don't think positive and negative. We think good and bad. Having good self-esteem means that I think it's fantastic, that I'm a great person, that I can knock back the haters, and I do the whole Z-snap thing, and I've just aged myself and really, really kind of probably made myself look even stupider. But this concept, right, when we hold self-esteem, when people talk about self-esteem, there's this whole concept of good self-esteem and bad self-esteem. So, what I try to avoid when we are talking about this whole thing is actually using the words self-esteem. Because there's an inherent weight on that, there's an inherent bias. We've talked about bias. There's an inherent bias when I say self-esteem that it means something. So instead, the object, or not the object, the term that I would suggest or that I would recommend or that I would advocate for is concept of self. Pure and simple. Because a concept of self is an overall view of who I believe I am. There's no good, there's no bad. There's no I'm a good person, I'm a bad person, I do right things, I've done wrong in my life. No, concept of self just merely refers to the idea of who I am as a person. Remembering as we kind of talk about ACT, ACT is the principle of a realistic view. It's about standing outside the judgments. It's about being able to look at it and notice it and observe it. And that's what concept of self does. Concept of self tries to step us outside that judgment that's attached to good self-esteem or bad self-esteem. And instead, it creates the idea of you are an individual. And within that individual, there are some things that you would class as flaws, and there are absolutely some things that you would class as strengths. And neither of those is good, bad, more powerful, less powerful. Everything's there. To divert slightly, there's an interest, off topic trade. One of the things that I find very interesting, I have a passing interest in a vast majority of kind of religions and spiritualities and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that I find interesting about pagan kind of positions, especially the Norse paganism, which is one that I have looked at in the past, the Norse pagan position is that the gods are not all-powerful, omnipotent, beyond reproach. The Norse pagan ideal is that the gods are just as flawed as humans. And I think the part I like about that is this idea that I don't then have to hold myself to this ideal that exists. When we go back far enough, that's a lot of the concept of the right and the wrong, and the self-esteem is godliness. How close am I to God? And I think the issue in a lot of things is what originally made sense. We kind of still do, but we don't look at it. We don't actually think of it that way. And so self-esteem then becomes this whole process of I'm measuring myself against stuff that doesn't have the relevancy that it did. And ACT likes to approach it much more from that position of I am flawed. But I am no more flawed or less flawed than everybody else. Just we are. There is the I am. This is what I am. And so when we talk about balanced self-esteem, there's an interesting little model. Now, if I had a whiteboard or something that I could actually show, it would be great. I don't, so you're going to have to just close your eyes and imagine with me. I feel like something from Blue's Clues at this point. Imagine, if you will, that there's kind of a circle, and that circle represents the part of you that says, I'm okay, I'm fine, I'm a good person, because our heads always think that way, even though this is what we're working on, right? Not good person, but there's this idea, right, that I'm an okay person, that things are fine. And that wall is designed to effectively stop the things that are inconsistent with what I want to believe. Now, imagine, if you will, there's this circle, right? Now, what people will say is good self-esteem is I will allow the positive in and I will deflect the negative. So when people give me compliments, people tell me positive things about myself, I'll let that in. But if somebody points out something that I did that wasn't something they wanted, or if there's any kind of sense of maybe being ashamed or embarrassed, I'm going to deflect that. I'm going to push that back because I don't need that kind of negativity in my life. The problem is that creates a skew that is unrealistic. Because all of us have flaws. Nobody is perfect. On the contra side, is that a word? It's totally a word now. The contra side of that is, imagine, if you will, the circle. What people will refer to as bad self-esteem is I will deflect the positives. So when people give me compliments, I will find reasons to not listen to those, to believe that those are not accurate. But I will absolutely accept the negatives. So I will think about the things that I've done and I will feel regret for those. Or if people tell me that I was rude, I will absolutely just completely buy into that. And so we set up this kind of, this mismatch, this dichotomy, this contradictory kind of position, where for me to be feeling positive about myself, I've got to constantly hit back the negatives and only accept the positives. That's not realistic. It's not how we respond. When somebody says something, we have a reaction to that. We've talked about that with the kind of the ACT consideration of emotions. We don't control our emotions or our thoughts. We can try and manage them. We can notice them and try not to let them have too much of an impact, but we can't control them arriving. So there's this unrealistic belief system we've created. Not we, not me and you, obviously. Like we as in those people out there. Me and you, we're good, we're fine. Sorry. So we've created this unrealistic kind of system where if I then accept the negative, or I have the reaction to the negative, then that somehow becomes this is a me problem. This is something I'm doing that's wrong by allowing this in. We talked a bit about the clean and the dirty emotions. Right? Clean emotions being I feel it. The dirty emotions is what I feel about feeling it. This is a classic example. If somebody points out something that I am a little embarrassed about, embarrassment is a clean emotion. It absolutely makes sense. Yep, I wasn't my best for that day. But if I've got this idea that my self-esteem is that I can't accept that from somebody because it wasn't my fault, I didn't mean to do it, and I try and push that back, I don't push that back, it arrives. And I do feel the embarrassment. And then the dirty emotion kicks in because now I feel angry about feeling embarrassed, or I feel ashamed that I did something, even though embarrassment is a perfectly acceptable emotion to be dealing with about. And so we get this contrast, right, where because I've created something, all of a sudden, everything that goes around that becomes an issue. It becomes dirty emotions. It becomes what I think about myself rather than what I think about what's actually happened. Balanced self-esteem is being able to hold on to or reject both positive and encouraging and negative and whatever the opposite of encouraging is. Discouraging? Let's go with discouraging. So I need to be able to have healthy, balanced self-esteem. I just said at the beginning I wasn't going to use self-esteem. I keep talking about self-esteem. For me to have a balanced concept of self, I need to be able to hear the positives. I need to be able to hear the compliments. I need to be able to accept that those are true. Even if I don't necessarily feel like they're true, I have to accept that if somebody has noticed that, then there is an element of that must be some level of truth. And I also need to be able to knock back somebody blowing smoke up my ass. And somebody trying to tell me that I'm fantastic and great and everything, if what I did really wasn't over and above anything that anybody else would have or could have done. So I need to be able to accept, but also reject the positives, the encouragement. And I need to be able to deflect and push back the negatives of somebody trying to blame you for something that wasn't your fault. Somebody trying to tell you that you did this because of this, and no, I did that because I didn't even think about it. Trying to attribute a sense of intention to what's going on when there was no intention. You need to be able to push that away. You need to also, however, be able to accept when somebody does give you discouragement. The word doesn't really fit. Let's go with discouragement, just because I'm on a theme. We need to be able to hear that. We need to be able to accept what part I have played in that. Yes, actually, the other day when that occurred, I was not at my best. Now, that doesn't need to even go into an apology. Sometimes an apology will be helpful. Sometimes identifying that and apologizing to the person that was involved is absolutely something that's going to be helpful. Sometimes it's not about the apology, it's about being able to accept, actually, no, I wasn't at my best that day. I might try, in my head, I'm thinking I might see if I can get somebody to post something onto the Facebook page with a picture of this, with little arrows and stuff, just to give a pictorial reference to this kind of concept of self idea that I'm talking about. Hopefully I've explained myself so incredibly well that you've all got it perfectly in your head. Instantly you can open your eyes now. because I think I said close your eyes and imagine or something. Yeah, and I totally believe that you all had your eyes closed that entire time. Okay, so remembering here, so then the objective of looking at the concept of self stuff, we want to be able to reduce the judgments. Like I've kind of said, I've probably rambled incoherently about it for a bit now. There is a sense here when we hold this idea of self-esteem, or we hold this idea, the concept of self is this thing that is solid and I must do. It creates this sense of judgment. It creates this idea of being a good person or a bad person, and right and I do wrong, and all those kind of things. And of course, that's what we're trying to avoid with ACT. The concept of ACT is stepping away from judgments. It's about noticing, it's about observing, it's about being mindful, but being present. It's about not fusing with anything that's there. So we talked again, right, the fusion with the absolute truths, that I hold it. Having a concept of self, imagine, if you will, almost the right word would be, we want a fluid concept of self. There's a famous saying, and of course I'm not going to remember the famous saying, but it's by Bruce Lee. You'll all know about it, right? It's the idea of being the water. It's not about being strong or solid, it's being water, it's being fluid. It's being able to move with whatever is occurring. And that's very much a kind of concept of ACT that fits into there as well. So the question we have then is, so what do we do? How do we improve our concept of self? How do we conceptualize our concept of self? How do I determine whether my concept of self is balanced and it's fluid, or if it is skewed? If I know it's skewed, how do I bring it back to balance? And so there's, according to my notes that I've written, there's 4 kind of ways that we would do that. Not so much 4 ways, think of it more as 4 steps, okay? I don't know if I've talked about this. If I have, apologies, but I'm going to talk about it again anyway. I will often talk, when we are creating a change, about there being 3 stages to change. Actually no, I can't use stages, I shouldn't. It's not helpful to use stages of change because that's actually a very specific model. Think of these as phases. There's 3 phases to creating change. The first phase is what I refer to as hindsight. Hindsight is when I get to the end of a day and I look back at my day and I go, oh, I didn't want to do that. That is not something that I'm about. That is not something I want to do. Okay, so tomorrow I'm going to resolve I'm not going to do things that way. I'm going to change that. The second phase that's attached to creating change is referred to, again, by me. I don't know if this is an official thing, this is what I call it, immediately after. Immediately after is when I do something or I say something and immediately go, no, that's not what I wanted to do. That's not how I want to do this. Okay, let me remedy that now. Whether that's, I'm sorry, I said it that way, that is not what I intended. So immediately after you have done the thing that you're trying to change, you notice it and you immediately have the opportunity to try and kind of rationalize it, to step back from it, to do whatever's required. And the third phase that is attached to creating change is preemptive. And that's when I go to do something, stop myself and go, hey, no, wait a second, back up here. Yeah, no, not doing that, no, doing this a different way. And I would say that this applies to most things. It's very obvious for a lot of times in behavioural change, when we're trying to change a specific behaviour. To give you a very quick example of that, if I decided I wanted to quit smoking, I might get to the end of the day, I'd look back and go, I got stressed at that meeting and I went out and had a cigarette. That's not what I want to do. No, I've decided I'm not doing this anymore. Phase 2 would be, I'm outside, I light up, I had the cigarette. I put the cigarette out and I go, I'm here again. Or even just, I light the cigarette and I have a couple of puffs and then I'm like, no, I'm not doing this again. And the third phase would be, I walk outside, I get a cigarette out. Or I don't buy cigarettes. I go to ask somebody for a cigarette and I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm doing something different. So behaviorally, it makes a lot of sense, right? You can clearly see it when it talks about behavior change. What I'm asking and what I'm hoping happens is we're not doing a behavior change. We're creating a change within you. So these kind of 4 steps, I suppose, that I talk about, they will fit into these idea of the 3 phases, right? The hindsight, the immediately after, and the preemptive. But there's a slightly different step to get us to those. So the first one, and there's a lot of kind of ACT terminology that will come into this. The first step that I would talk about, increasing, improving, or balancing concept of self, is diffuse. Do you remember a while back we talked about a piece of paper or your hand and having the negative cognitions and thoughts and stuff on that piece of paper and holding it up, and it then meaning I'm not engaging with the stuff that's meaningful, right? I'm not talking about anything else. It doesn't matter what's on that piece of paper. It's stopping me from engaging with my meaningful activity. It's stopping me with engaging with people. It's stopping me engaging with the things that I want to do. This is no different when we talk about concept of self. There is actually, I'm going to give you an activity to do. Oh no, the activity I'm giving you is not this specifically. The activity would be attached to this, but it's slightly different because you're not in front of me. I know that got really confusing really quickly. I apologize. Imagine, if you will, right, that you wrote down all the positive things that you believe about yourself on a piece of paper. And on the other side of that piece of paper, you wrote down all the negative things about yourself. When you hold that piece of paper up in front of your face, it doesn't matter which side you're looking at. It's still stopping you from engaging with the things that are now, the present, the meaningful activity. And this is what that first step is about. First step in talking about concept of self, in improving or balancing concept of self, is diffusing from whatever is there. You'll remember when we talked about diffusing. It's not about getting rid of it. It's just about holding it lightly. It's about having it in your possession, in your hands, but not in such a way that it's impacting my ability to deal with anything, to engage with anything. This is no different to just looking at the kind of unhelpful thought processes that we've talked about previously. Step 2, I talked about whole behavior change. Step 2 is we behaviorize it. Behaviorize. Totally a word, right? What we want to do when we behaviorize is we want to look at the things that we do that tell me what kind of person I am. It's very hard, I believe, it's very hard for somebody to be able to look at themselves without having done a whole heap of kind of consideration and actually have a balanced view. Most people will decide if they're a good person or a bad person. And I don't need to go on that rant again because we've already had that. But the issue that we have is, to change that, I need evidence. If I believe that I'm a bad person, if I've internalized that sense of me being a bad person, to change that, no amount of me thinking, oh, but I'm actually nice, is going to change that. I need to turn it into a behavioral thing. I need to identify the things that I do. We talked a bit about the control, right? We can't control our thoughts and emotions. We can manage them, we can play with them, we can't control them. But I can control my behaviors. So there's an element of I need to sit down and I need to work out, what do I do that I believe makes me It's really hard to do this without saying good and bad, because that's what so much of our concept of self and self-esteem is linked into. What do I do that makes me a good person, makes me a person that I want to be? I'm nice to animals. I show affection to my kids. I don't ram people off the roads when they cut me off. It has nothing to do with my drive this morning. I have to look for behaviours. I have to look for some of the things that show me in my own eyes that I am the kind of person that I want to be. If you're really struggling, and actually this comes into the third step, now that I think about it, this is the third step, tied into this, right? If that's a real challenge, externalize it. Actually, don't, externalize may not be the right word. Recruit. That's a much better word. So I've done step one. I've kind of diffused from it. I've gone, right, I'm aware of all these things that are going on, but no, I'm going to step back from that. I'm not going to buy into whether I think I'm a good person or a bad person. And then I've gone to step two and I've gone, okay, now I'm going to think about the things that I do that tell me I'm the kind of person that I want. I'm really struggling with this. I can think of these three things, but I can also think of all these things that show me that I'm not the person I want to be. Oh, this is getting really hard. Recruit. Step three. Find somebody important to you. Find somebody that you love, and in big capital neon flashing signs, that also loves you or cares for you. Don't go to somebody who generally just is nasty to you and look for that to try and give you the idea of a balanced concept of self. It's not going to happen. Regardless of whether you really like that person, if they're not nice to you, don't go there. Go to somebody that is important to you, but that shows there's a level of affection and balance. Kids are fantastic at this. Now, when one of my clients that I literally did this exercise with sees this, she's probably going to laugh, and the next time I see her, she's probably going to throw a pillow at me or something. But one of the ways that can be really helpful to kind of shift what I think of myself or what I believe that I'm doing is asking other people to tell me the things that I'm doing. And kids are great, because no matter how much you think your child is a shit, chances are you love them, and you love them, I was going to say unconditionally. No, you love them unconditionally, even if you don't like them sometimes, but there's absolute love. You'd do anything for them. And kids know that. Ask your kids to describe you in 3 words. Don't sit with them and coach them, don't give them suggestions, just literally say, I want you to describe me in 3 words. Go away, write it down if you need to, and come back. Most kids will come back with things that you probably didn't even really think, right? You're probably expecting your kids to come back with, bossy and, smart and a good cook, right? So these are just really generic kind of things. I'm always amazed when I give this activity to anybody, and the kids, they come back with things like strong, wise, loving, affectionate. Other people, especially kids, sometimes parents, sometimes partners, sometimes really close friends, right? Is a little bit, it sounds really hazy, but you do need to pick the people that you feel are going to give you balanced responses. People will see the things in you that you don't necessarily see in yourself, or they will see you doing things that mean something to them when you may not see that yourself. So there's an idea of, that externalize. No, not externalize. We're not calling it externalizing, Mike. Get with the program. We're calling it recruiting. Recruit people the feedback that you've got from your kids or your partner is kind of, there's a couple of things there that are great, and there's one thing there that you're like, oh, I really wish I didn't do that. You don't have to dive into that one. Pieces of feedback, and I got the negative piece of feedback. I got the piece of feedback that tells me I'm not the person I want to be. You bet your ass that's the bit that I'm going to stick to, that I'm going to hold on to, that I'm going to think about how I need to change. I've been doing ACT for years. I've been doing this I've been trying to do this stuff for a decade at least. Your automatic processing still happens. So the fourth step, the most important step in regards to ACT, when you receive this, whether it's from other people or whether it's your own consideration, what do I do that makes me the person that I want to be? Versus the things that I do that are incongruent, that don't fit with who I want to be. When you've got all that stuff, I'm going to call it evidence, stuff together, just hold it. Allow it to exist, notice it. We don't have to agree with it. Right? Going back, fusion. We don't want fusion. I don't want to believe that this is absolute truth. That's not helpful to me. This may be true, and it may be an interpretation, a perception, mine or theirs, but there's no absolute truth here. To identify positive, balanced concept of self, I need to be able to hold just all of that and let it sit, let it exist. The stuff that's important to me will maintain. The stuff that's just there will probably slowly just leach away as I hold it. In the next couple of sessions, especially the next session, we're going to be talking a lot. Well, we're going to be talking a lot. I'm going to be talking a lot. I know I could just put a full stop there and it would still be accurate. I'm going to talk about values and a little bit of goals, right? So there's going to be a bit of a conversation about how do I consider or determine the things that are important to me. So I've done quite a lot of conversation today about being the person that I want to be. That's going to be the focus of the next stream, is trying to identify a little bit more about this. What do I value? What's important to me? What do I stand for? Because that is going to be a relatively integral part to continuing to develop concept of self, to continuing to develop the aim or the objective of when I want to build an aspect of my concept of self. Because we always want to be the people that we want to be. That is the worst sentence that you are probably going to hear all day. We want to be the people we want to be. That's just genius. That's like genius levels, big brain thinking. Okay, let me try that again, but this time I'll see if I can make it sound slightly less weird. We want to be the best version of ourselves. Now, when we're talking about values and goals, or we're talking about values at least in the next stream, that's getting a picture of what the best version of ourselves is. But the concept of self, we've got to have an idea of that first. We have to be able to identify our concept of self. We need to understand how it looks. And if it doesn't look like I want it to look, I've got to be able to kind of go, okay, what's happening here? Am I sabotaging? Like, am I bringing stuff in, or what's happening here? Because I need to have this view of myself to be able to believe that the best version of myself is something that I can achieve, that it's something I can go to. So as a means of practicing this idea of holding things about myself without fusing with them, without believing them, without them being absolute truth, but just being able to hold them, here is the exercise that I would like you to do. I would like you to get a piece of paper. The little palm cards you get, that's probably kind of the ideal size. We want it to be small enough. We need it to be big enough that you can put a few words on it, but small enough that you can put it in a pocket or a handbag or leave it in your car. So there's no point in trying to do this on like an A3 sheet, because you're really going to struggle to take that anywhere. Because what I would like you to do is I would like you to write down 6 things total, but I would like you to write down the 3 things that your head tells you are negative. The 3 things that your head tells you are inconsistent with who you want to be. The deficits, the flaws. And then I want you to write 3 things that are positives, that your head tells you are positive. The 3 things that I do well. The 3 things that are consistent with who I want to be. The strengths. There may be some values level that comes into that without even kind of talking about values next week. So we're going to have 6 things. We're going to have 3 that are what we would normally class as negative, and 3 that we would normally class as positive. Ideally, they will be on opposite sides of the paper. Now, what I would like, once you've done that, goes in your handbag, goes in your car, goes in your work bag, sits in a pocket. Pocket's a bit dicey, right? Because if you wash your shirt, you lose it. So, yeah, or pants. But you want it somewhere. Because what I would like, what would be ideal is, over the next week, you can do it for longer than that, but let's just assume week, because, let's assume you don't hate me and you're coming back next week. Over the next week, what I'd like you to do is get that piece of paper out. Read one side, read the other side, and put it away. Don't think about it. Don't spend any time wondering if it's true or not true. Don't apply any sense of how do I make that better, how do I make it worse, how do I decrease it or increase it. I don't want any thought to go into that. I'd like as little thought to go into that as possible. Once they're written down, they are just words on the page. The ideal will be that you will do that 2 or 3 times a day. You'll get it out, you'll read one side, you'll read the other side, you'll put it away. What I am trying to do, what we're trying to do in this is, there's a little part of it that is desensitizing. I want you to be able to read these and not feel those words. But on the other side, it's very much about diffusion. We've talked a lot about diffusion. Reading them, putting them away, that is the ultimate form in this instance of just holding something lightly, of it existing, of it being there, but of it having no contribution to my meaningful life at all. And I want that to be the thing that sits with your concept of self. All of these things exist. Some of them I'm going to want to increase and some of them I'm going to want to decrease. But those first few steps that are involved in this is I've actually just got to let them exist. Let them sit there. Decide, right? The circle with the arrows. Which of these are legitimate? Which of these do I allow in because that isn't consistent with what I want to be? And which of these do I knock back? Because they're not accurate. They're not true of me. They don't resonate with me. Hopefully, that's as clear as mud. Whenever I do this and I don't have somebody kind of going, what are you talking about? I get concerned that maybe I've just made no sense whatsoever. But I'm choosing to believe that it made perfect sense. And that over the next week, this is what you're going to do. And as always, I will be interested in any kind of feedback. If people do this activity and you want to post on the Facebook page or you want to respond, I will be interested in hearing what kind of effect that has, how people feel about that. Once you've done that, does it make much of a difference? Does it make no difference? Hopefully, I said right at the very, very beginning of all of these, I'm not the expert on you. You are the expert on you. I have all these kind of random things that I'll try and do or I'll suggest. But if they work, fantastic. If they don't work, let me know. I'll try and come up with another way of creating the same kind of experience. So again, I'm not sure if this was shorter than normal. I can't see, the computer is too far away. Or if it's gone the usual length because I've just rabbited like a madman. That happens. So, write down the three things, and just spend the next week noticing those, observing those, but not agreeing with those, not fusing with those. And I will see you again next week. Have a great week.